Here we are back again, second reading for March the 16th, 2023, chapter 45. Zona seldom ate out, but today she was too tired to make any of the food she had available at home. Everything left in the house had a high time factor involved, but thankfully there was a restaurant she favored. The most uncomfortable part of eating out was the big screen TVs they had placed all over the place in restaurants now. She was delivered her meal and she dug in eagerly as she had not had a bite since breakfast. One of the patrons requested the bartender turn the TV to Fox News Network. She shuddered. This is one of the most toxic stations. The one she hated worse was the court channel. She tried to look elsewhere and continued eating. A few moments later, she heard the TV channel shift again. She looked up to see court TV. She gave up on her food and laid the fork on the table. She waited for the server to return so she could request a bill. She would complain about the TV to the manager on the establishment's website. Drinking her water, she couldn't help but pick up the word suicide in the background. Then she focused on the screen and read the words. If you put an end to this existence, but that you don't erase yourself from creation, you come back, you continue, and you carry this deed with you. She thought to herself, that's just what I always thought. If I checked out before I learned the lessons I need to learn these lessons, I'll be sent back for a do-over. I'll be at the gates of heaven. Do not pass go. Do not collect eternity until you do your time and learn what you need to know. So that idea is off the table. She noticed that the website was displayed and she dug a pen and scrap of paper from her bag and wrote it down to check it later. Chapter 46, Jacob. Jacob fit the mouthwash into the sink basin and motored down the hall to the TV room of the rehab where he was recuperating, if one could call it that, from his accident. In the late evening, he often came in here and used a giant remote control to surf before bed. This evening, what he found was captivating by a case. This evening, he found he was captivated by a case on court TV. They were talking about suicide. The old guy's translator explained that bodies of the executed were sold as meat during the French Revolution. Creepy. That woman they had sure didn't look like a typical terrorist. First off, she was a woman. How often do you hear that? And she was white and of all things Canadian, not the stereotypical terrorist. Chapter 47. Helen, Aaron, and Carrie climbed the steps into Carrie's grandmother's house. Helen was tense because she'd heard so much negative about this woman, but wanted to be handy to support Carrie as they gathered to watch court TV. Aaron had known Ida for many years through the artist circles. He was not intimidated by her because he'd seen her enough to know the gruff exterior was a mask for her deep sensitivity and compassion. The lady was an artist as well as a philanthropist. He was aware of at least two organizations she'd regularly, generously donated to. One was a group who assisted fine arts students financially. The other group were victims of family violence. Both causes were dear to her heart as she had begun life dirt poor and as a child suffered abuse from her mentally ill mother. The housekeeper let them go into the big house and took their coats. Let them into the big house, not let them go into the big house. Carrie led them into the study where the big screen TV was mounted. Ida was waiting beside the well-stocked bar, preparing a whiskey on the rocks for herself. She offered them a drink. All declined. The housekeeper offered them hot drinks. Carrie asked for chamomile tea and Aaron for a decaf coffee with just cream. Ida pointed to the remote at the TV and it came on very loud. Pointed the remote. Annoyed, she turned it down and mumbled something about her housekeeper's grandson playing music too loud again. They all accepted napkins and hors d'oeuvres from a tray offered by the returning housekeeper. Aaron spotted a bowl of expensive nuts on the side table and fetched them to be handy for later. Carrie introduced Helen to her grandmother. Being of similar age, they chatted comfortably as they awaited the delivery of the drinks in the kitchen. They all claimed a space on the sumptuous furniture around the large room that would offer a view of the TV as well as each other. Finally, the session began. There was MJ looking pensive and her lawyer looking unsure of himself. Carrie began scratching her leg, then switched to her arm. Helen spotted this and whispered, Carrie, you're scratching. You don't want to make yourself bleed again, do you? Carrie shook her head, ceased scratching, at least momentarily. How much of their judgment would be based on fear and ignorance on the grounds that the world knew of MJ's homosexuality? How many of these people would be against her because of her alliance with a Jew? And finally, how much prejudice would MJ face based on her attitude towards marijuana? Now the camera was focused on the DA. He presented as supremely confident as he called the first witness to the stand. They listened to the convoluted explanation of the government department who had confiscated a couple of computers. Theoretically, according to their information, anyone who worked for Google should undergo national security screening if the range of their contacts was a factor in the likelihood of the nation's safety. Kerry explained to the group how the lessons often included students from around the world. In fact, the people from such diverse points and from different culture and spiritual traditions were joining together to save the world. Was one of the highest points for MJ. She tried to be faithful and show up for each live session so the group's focus and concentration could be larger. This meant at times being up past her normal bedtime, but she suffered through as much as possible, knowing that the group in Israel regularly studied in the middle of the night because they had jobs and families to deal with during the day. Helen asked, "What do you mean? The group's focus of concentration would be greater." They believe that at a certain point, the intention of the group goes from separate single minds to join into one mind. The sum is greater than the whole, so to speak. They believe that eventually all of humanity will be joined into one consciousness. I'd put in like the hundredth monkey phenomenon. Helen looked perplexed and shook her head. At this juncture, Arab posited, "You mean like the story of the young monkeys on an island off Japan that learned to wash the sweet potatoes?" Carrie nodded. The idea was that at a certain point, the hundredth monkey, so to speak, that the monkeys on the mainland spontaneously figured out and this out. And although the island was too far out for any to have swum over and shared this information. So this supports the belief that there's a common species intelligence, something like Jung's collective unconscious. Helen didn't seem to get it. You mean like a flock of birds or a school of fish moves like its oval creature? I'd help. Yes, something like that. There is a notion held by some in science that if a critical mass of an idea is reached, it spreads throughout what biologists call morphogenic morphogenetic fields. Helen nibbled on the cracker and nodded in understanding. Carrie put in, "They're working towards joining all people into one heart. It's not that Kabbalists are utopian. They see the only way through the walls of our differences is to transform our nature. We have to rise above our narrow, egoistic perceptions and see a much broader picture, a spiritual level of reality. In other words, humanity must first develop a new perception that's outside our egoism, which Kabbalists call the common human soul. When this happens, all our differences will seem to vanish because they'll be united by the higher quality of oneness." They have a really cute little video that begins with all these cogwheel creatures buried underground. They dig and dig, but only seem to end up buried deeper. Finally, one of them realizes how to do it and tells all the others that if they begin to dig towards each other, they can escape their isolation and make it to freedom together. They read the quote from the small book during the break that Carrie had brought to share to help the others understand what had attracted MJ to the Kabbalist. If you're disconnected from what you do, nothing gives you pleasure. When you're involved in what you do, the smallest thing will give you pleasure. If you're behind what you do, life has a purpose. You don't have enough time to do everything you want to do. Aaron put in, "That's so true, isn't it? I see so many people now who are restless and discontent and constantly distracted from here and now by a screen of some kind. I heard that suicide is the second leading cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds. That's scary. I remember cutting my wrist when I was in junior high, but the world was not near as messed up as we know it is now, especially kids know. They're surfing an informational universe that we couldn't have dreamt of back in the 70s, Carrie added, that's for sure. Ida went on, "Oh, come on, this generation is a bunch of spoiled, entitled babies. They wouldn't know hard work or a difficult condition if they fell on it. Live through the Depression, live through a couple of world wars, and then talk about how rough your life is." Until then, stop belly aching. I'm sick of the whining. She gave Aaron a subtle wink during this spiel, but Carrie took it all seriously, and having lived under her Graham's judgment for too many years, Helen followed with, all I know is that my grandkids are constantly bored and they need to always have some kind of expensive toy to play with. When I visit, they're in the room with a TV, computer, a game system, iPad, or a cell phone interface. Good luck asking them to the stuff down and come and visit. They even bring it to the table at mealtimes if they come to the table at all. But they're never content to side it out. There's always the next big thing they absolutely must have or they'll die. I can't afford that stuff for myself, let alone buy it for children. Carrie joined the discussion now with, there's a reason for that, according to the Kabbalists. They claim we're all searching for the meaning of life. According to them, humans are about one thing, desire. The Creator shattered the original one soul so we could know infinite delight. There's a process we must go through over time as a species to satisfy different kinds of desires for pleasure from the body or money or honors, and these must be seen to be found empty. Only then will a desire for spirituality arrive. Right now, the world's maxing out on stuffing the whole soul with anything that will abstract it from the emptiness. This vast gulf is what the youth have been born into. When the elders in a society teach a generation what the meaning of life is, suicide is limited. But we have a media universe filled with hate, destruction, obscene abuse of humanity, and a quest for profit. The digital was more real than any values they may have heard or seen as they've grown up. The hypocrisy is self-evident in the shredded Costco's and Walmarts. What faith has this generation to light the darkness of despair, to give purchase on a rail on the edge of nothingness? Oh, wax poetic. Sorry. She needn't have apologized because the rest were engaged in the TV, not her. She prayed that MJ could keep from losing patience. They all gasped when the cannibalism was mentioned. It didn't seem as though the defense lawyer was prepared for this shocker. He seemed to catch up, though, as the day went on. Ida got up, stretched, and rang for the housekeeper. Shortly, the small woman with the short dark hair appeared, and her employer requested more canopies and asked about the time left until dinner. The woman nodded and answered, dinner will be ready at 7 as usual, madam. The older, elegant woman freshened her drink and went to her desk where she sat and made several notes. Despite the TV and guests, she was thinking about how to improve the painting she was working on for the last several weeks. It needed more pews in the sky. She looked out the window at her well-tended garden. Soon it would be covered with snow for 6 months. She was a fit, healthy 81 years old, but even so, she felt a paralysis come on each time the cold season hit her bones, and she wondered if she would see another spring. She couldn't understand why anyone would commit suicide. The early part of her life had been spent trying to survive to get to the next tomorrow, but now she spent her days enjoying the pleasures afforded from all her dear husband's work. He never had the luxury to even enjoy a retirement as he dropped dead of a heart attack at age 52. She'd survived the loss of her husband and only son, but continued to live as an affirmation of what her partner would have wanted. In some ways, she was relieved that her son didn't live long enough to see what had become of his baby girl. He would have had a hard time with his sexuality. She was much more liberal thinking than either her son or her husband. Oh, and she also needed more light on the water in her picture. The housekeeper returned with more munchies and passed them around. She also carried a kettle of steaming water on the tray and a selection of teas, which she described as Earl Grey, chamomile, chai, and pumpkin spice. Or if you like, I can build you a latte or espresso. The dinner was hot and tasty, but it was consumed in almost utter silence, other than when one of the group needed a dish or a pickle tray passed. Carrie was gloomy because the little time she saw MJ on the TV, she looked so to be in so much pain. She thought her trying to unobtrusively stretch after a time in the witness box. Helen was pensive because it appeared that the DA had more evidence to convict than the lawyer had to save. She hoped that the man would have more support for MJ's innocence next time. Aaron dropped the two women off and carried on home. He was confident that in the end, MJ would triumph. He had faith that good always wins out in the end. The end. What an interesting thought, considering that so many believed the end of the world was at hand. He was of the belief that the end of the world as we know it is incoming. The end. Oop, need my glasses to click the button. In stream.